We found ourselves at a ponderosa pine tree, which is a very lucky find. Ponderosa pines have great needles to make tea out of, which are really high in vitamin C. We'll show that. You just kind of crush them up and boil them. Also, they have the inner cambium layer, so you peel off the bark, and that inside layer is definitely a survival food. It has a lot of starch in it, sometimes a little bit of sugar, and you can basically peel it off, eat it raw. You can toast it over the fire and grind it into a flour. You can make jerky out of it. It's not the most pleasant tasting food. It kind of tastes like pine, like you'd expect, but that starch is really good for our systems and certainly something that you should look out for if you are really hungry and need something to eat. Particularly when you're cold in the evening times or during the day, if you need to warm yourself up, a great way to do so is to take down hot liquids. And while you're at it, we might as well get some vitamins into our system, or if we have a cold or a problem, use the correct plants to help combat that issue that we're having with our health. A couple of plants that are doing well right now at this time of year are ponderosa pine needles, green pine needles, very high in vitamin C, like amazingly high in vitamin C. The other that I've procured is a mullein plant. The leaves themselves are basically velvet. When it's fresh, these are great things to use for toilet paper. I've taken the time to dry a bunch of leaves, and we can now make a tea out of them or grind them up and actually smoke them like you would smoke a cigarette, and they're phenomenal for your respiratory system. So this combination is a nice little combination of tea. I've got my cup on the fire with my water nice and hot, and one thing that you can do is just put these in boiling water, but if you really want to get all of that nice juicy vitamin C out, go ahead and remove some pine needles and crush them so that you can see the juice coming out. Basically, you're just breaking down that outer sheath so that, oh, this rock is hot, so that the water doesn't have to work through it so much to get the nutrients out. And you can do this with a huge batch of pine needles and make a big batch of tea. You don't have to worry about eating the tips, they're fine to eat too. Basically, you can eat all of a pine tree. Anyway, something like that. Maybe a little bit more. You really see how it's getting wet and juicy. And take this off. And then I can just go ahead, this water, let's say it's boiling right now. Then I would go ahead and afterwards drop in my pine needles, let them soak for a bit. With my dried mullein leaves, I'm just going to break it up into smaller pieces. Stir it around and wait a little bit. But while it's still hot, you know, for that heat to warm your system, if you'd like, drink it. Or you can wait for this to cool completely and have sort of, you know, a cold drink of cold tea, iced tea. Well, not really iced tea out here, but, you know, lukewarm tea, okay? And it's really good for you. So there are male and female pine cones, and with the males, you can do a couple things with them. You can take off the tips and crush them into kind of a powder form and use them for flour. You can also just eat them directly. They don't taste great, taste like pine, but they are known to be candied and become delicious candies. And as I've mentioned with the pine needles, they're really high in vitamin C. So a good thing to pop in your mouth if you need a quick snack. Though you have to catch them at the right time, otherwise they really aren't that tasty.
Yummy.
Not the right time. Not the right time. We've just come across a dandelion, a popular weed that almost everyone has heard about at this point, is edible, and is actually quite delicious. The best way to harvest it is when you find them very young. The young green leaves have less of a bitter quality to them, but even when they're older, you can still eat them raw, or you can cook them more of like a flash boil. That works well. You can also grind the roots and make them into a kind of a coffee substitute. And the flowers themselves can be made into a wine and also just eaten raw. So these are examples of dandelion leaves. Dandelion, like lion teeth, right? And so these are very sharp examples. When they're young, actually the edges are fairly smooth along the leaf. But the real giveaway for all of this is, of course, the flower. So we look down here and we find a dandelion flower, always yellow. You can see that there's a basal formation, meaning that the leaves come out around the bottom of the plant, and the stem is also edible, by the way, but you can just pop the head off and then eat it, and it's delicious. It's a bit sweet. If you're trying to make a garnish for a salad just for beauty, it's always nice to put flowers that are edible on top, and this is a great example. Dandelions in general are great as liver tonics, and they can also be a diuretic, so it is something you want to watch out for here if you have a minimal amount of water and dehydration is of concern to you. You don't want to eat too many dandelions, but a reasonable amount is going to be fine. There's a plant called Oregon grape, which looks a lot like a holly, but has strong properties of berberine in it, which can be great if you acquire a waterborne illness because it has high antiseptic properties. And when ingested as a tea or chewed on when it's dried, the root, it can help you to clean out your system and take care of that oftal, Giardia or Cryptosporidium or whatever is bothering your tummy and making you really sick. So what we're going to do is confirm that this is what this is by looking at the root, and it should be yellow in color. This also can be used for a dye and was by many of the ancients who lived in the area. I mentioned lupin leaves being a great toilet paper, and this is lupin. Toxic to ingest, but soft, large leaves, easy to gather. And you take a ton of these in your hands and a big mound of them, and you have a nice toilet paper to use. So I would say that lupin leaves, along with mullein and sagebrush, are my favorite toilet papers. FYI. Forget Charmin. No, remember Charmin. I'm not like totally weird. I like toilet paper more than plants myself, but can't always have toilet paper out in the woods. Next to this beautiful creek, we find ourselves just on the ledge in a gorgeous oak grove, surrounded by a lot of plants on the ground floor as well. One of the things I just grabbed was a white clover. White and red clovers are good to make tea from. I do recommend that you boil water and then put fresh clover flowers in the water, or dried, but not anywhere in between. Does that make sense? So pick it and go. And it's kind of sweet, tastes good. The other thing that I grabbed was this plant here. It's called yarrow. It is similar to usnea in that it helps to coagulate blood, and it is also a bacteriostatic plant. It's a clean plant to put into your wounds. You can either wrap an open wound while it's bleeding to help it stop, or you actually go ahead and chew on it and make a bit of a poultice. So we'll use that wound as an example, and then I would just kind of hold it on there for a little bit, and it's incredible how quickly this works and how fast you will stop bleeding when you apply this. So I would say that usnea, yarrow, and plantain, something to research, are three plants that are great for cuts and wounds to research, check into, and see if you can identify them yourself. Besides the clover flowers, we've also seen lupin, a beautiful blue flower that has the great leaves for toilet paper. I've run across wild rose, which has many uses. With the petal, you can use it as sort of a band-aid. It's very high in vitamin C, the whole plant, but specifically the rose hips, and it helps women with stomach cramps. So another great plant. We've also seen serviceberry. It's a wood that is great for making arrow shafts and has a very recognizable leaf pattern because it does you lots of service. The beginning of it is straight like a knife and the end of it is jagged like a saw. So I remember it by saying it does me a lot of service. It's a serviceberry, and I can make arrows and tools from it. The best way to find out if it's edible, begin by applying some to your wrist. Rub it around a little bit. Wait a couple hours, see if you have a reaction. Then take a tiny, tiny little bit, put it in your mouth, chew it up, spit it out. See if you have a reaction. Wait a couple hours. Then maybe ingest a tiny bit. See if your throat gets dry or your stomach hurts. Immediately do not, stop eating that plant. If nothing goes wrong, perhaps take a small serving of it. See what happens overnight. And if all is well, then you've probably found a plant that's edible, or at least not toxic to you. A long process with learning your wild edibles and medicinals, but an important one.